Tim Nunes, the CEO of Midas, which is Manchester's inward investment agency, is joining us on our virtual stage and with us here in person. Very pleased to have Eileen Keynes, Head of International Public Policy at Diageo, and Dheeraj Nair, the Chief Economist at Vedanta, also an author and journalist. So, since you mentioned Scotch whisky, it's only 9:44 in the morning, but just as an example of the gains that could be made, Eileen, just give me an example about if we tackled that one, what changes might we see in terms of overall trade?
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity and lovely to hear Lord Bilimoria mention it this morning as well. I think if I give you an example about Diageo, so our business, India is the second largest market for our business, but the largest market for Scotch in the whole world. But if you think about what that means, actually only 1% of that is exported Scotch. So there's a huge opportunity there to grow those exports to India. The majority of what we do is send Scotch whisky in bulk to India, and therefore it's either bottled in India and sold as Scotch, or it becomes a part of Indian whisky and sold. So there's an opportunity there to grow jobs and investment in India as well. It was good hearing Tata speak this morning as well about the research they've done. We actually commissioned some research about a year or so ago from Oxford Economics, and the opportunities are huge to increase exports of Scotch for about over £1 billion over the next 4 years. If we can reduce the basic customs duty, it's 150% basic customs duty on exported Scotch and spirits. But in India as well, we're talking that would increase state excise revenues by about £3 billion per annum. So that's a huge opportunity in India as well to grow jobs, investment, and in the kind of post-pandemic recovery that's critical for success as well.
Dheeraj, let's talk about mining. Vedanta is a mining company. Can you speak about how much trade currently happens in mining and minerals in the UK, India trade, and how much room does this sector have to grow?
So it's very small. I think, if you look at the data from last year, the UK imported minerals and metals worth about $170 billion, and out of which India's share is a mere 1.5, so it's less than 1%. And it's the same the other way around. India imports more than $200 billion worth of metals, minerals, and oil, and we got about 1.8 billion from the UK. So both ways, it's extremely small. The potential is, of course, huge. I think the one thing with climate change and the energy transition, which people often miss, is how mineral intensive it's going to be. Because electric vehicles or the infrastructure is much more mineral intensive, 6 to 9 times. So this market is going to grow hugely, both in the UK and in India. And I think, again, especially for India, it's a matter of getting your domestic policy act together so that you can produce more, explore more. India is extremely rich geologically, similar to Australia and South Africa, in fact, whereas those countries, mining and minerals, metals contribute about 8 to 10% of GDP. In India, it's only about 1 or 2%. So the potential is that much more. We can go up to 8 times of what we're doing right now and export zinc, lead, steel, and copper to the UK. Similarly, import oil and gas and so on. So I think the potential is huge. And the good thing about free trade agreements is that apart from reducing barriers, they also put pressure on governments to reform their domestic policies. And I think that's one thing I'm very much looking forward to in this context, because we opted out of RCEP, India, for various reasons. But I think if we do need to engage with the world and do need to sign up to FTAs for the gains that will come from trade, but also in terms of the domestic policy reform, which will benefit not only trade, but also the domestic players and entrepreneurs in India.
So, Tim, let's bring you in. What does Manchester specifically have to gain from the opening up the roadmap between UK and India?
Thank you, and apologies I can't be there in person first of all.
Oh, you've frozen for a moment. Nothing like a hybrid conference to challenge us. Have we got you, Tim?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Carry on. Tell us what Manchester has to gain.
Great. Well, I think, Manu, similar to many of the other regional cities in the UK, whether it be the Scottish cities that we mentioned before, obviously big producer of whisky, or whether it be the likes of Bilimoria mentioned before with the automotive industry, well, they have a chance to gain from these deals. As we know, I mean, as Lord Bilimoria said in his initial preliminary speech, there's a huge living bridge, first of all, between the UK and India, and those exist right in the UK. Those connections are very deep in cities like Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, etc. So building on that, the new system as well, where we highly skilled industry potential to boost our sectors in particular, but also our universities as well. And I think one area that I don't think has been mentioned yet is the deepening of cooperation in educational services through the recognition of UK higher education qualifications in India, which I think would have significant benefits for a number of our top universities in the UK as well. At the moment, we have around 2,000 Indian students in Greater Manchester universities. And I know, again, across the country, similar sort of regional centres have the same. But we have 3 times as many Chinese students, for example, in Manchester. And therefore, I think there's a huge opportunity to increase that trade between our higher education institutions. But the other 2 points, I suppose, are around the lowering of trade barriers on the services industry, which is obviously vital. The UK being 71% service industry and India being 54%. And again, the regional cities are highly service orientated in many cases in the UK, as in India. And therefore, the way that we can increase the trade in services on the current pattern will continue to create, thousands, if not tens of thousands more jobs in both the UK and India. On the manufacturing side, and again, we've had obviously Tata on this morning. And Tata have huge manufacturing capabilities in the UK, both with Jaguar Land Rover in the Northwest and the Midlands, but also the likes of Brunner Mond, a chemicals company that will be producing hydrogen, and also the likes of Tetley Tea, some of our biggest brands, as long as JLR. And again, a reduction of tariffs and enhanced trading relations on manufacturing will also benefit certainly inward investment into the UK, but also we hope that investment of UK companies in India as well, which we can see growing deeply over the coming years.
Thank you. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Lord Bilimoria, I wonder if you could give us an idea of what a free trade agreement or even a lessening of tariffs and duties might have in terms of this idea of leveling up in the UK and in India.
Yes, the free trade agreements are fantastic. And if you free up and enable goods, services, mobility of people, professionals, the magnitude and impact is huge. But you've also got to use the agreements. And the big job that we've got at the CBI now, with the Australia deal, the New Zealand deal once they're signed, is to actually make sure in both countries, companies, businesses make the most of them. I also want to pick up on what Tim said, some very important points. Services. We are the UK, the second largest services exporter in the world. We're very good at services. We've got the best services across the board in the world. Now, just imagine how much more we could do in India. But at the moment, foreign lawyers, including British lawyers, some of the best in the world, can't practice in India. Now, if we open that up, the benefit to Indian business, it'll be huge. It's a win-win. So we need to open up education. I'm waiting for the new policy that will allow foreign universities to finally open up in India. The potential is huge. The University of Birmingham, we are now, as we speak, we've opened up a state-of-the-art, AI-enabled campus for 5,000 students in Dubai. I'm going to be going for the official opening during the Dubai Expo in early next year. We will be one of the first universities to be looking to opening up in India, one of the top 100 universities in the world, and there'll be others like us. That's going to be a huge benefit. The collaboration of joint research and development and innovation. Britain is brilliant at it. We underinvest. We're only 1.7% of GDP compared with America or Germany at 2.8%. And we've got a target to increase our investment in R&D and innovation. Cross-border collaboration between universities and companies in R&D and innovation, the multiple factor, 3 to 4 times more powerful than if you do it in your own country. And India is the perfect partner to do R&D innovation collaboration. So all that potential is right there, staring us in the face. We've just got to grab it with both hands and both countries run with it to both our advantages.
So an enormous amount of opportunities. Tell us, Eileen, can you widen out just from drinks and talk more about the trends within the food and drink space and how there might be this potential for this collaboration that keeps coming up?
Yeah, I just listened to Lord Billimore there as well. It's really interesting when I think of some of the sort of unintended consequences or the things that people don't instinctively think about when they think about trade agreements. We quite often talk at Diageo about every bottle of Johnnie Walker that we sell is an advert for Scotland, it's an advert for Scotch. And actually, pre-pandemic, about 1 in 5 visitors to Scotland came and they visited a distillery and they learned all about our beautiful national drink. And so one of the great opportunities with this is actually to be able to go out and talk to people about how that investment in tourism and trade can really impact back home in Scotland as well. So I think, recently we've invested about £185 million in tourism in Scotland, and, that wouldn't be possible without the international trade that we do. If I think about some of the trends, what you asked me about in India, we've seen a huge, so with this sort of emerging rising middle class, we've seen a huge interest in Scotch, but also in sort of premiumisation, so looking at other sort of Indian-made whiskies that have perhaps got higher Scotch content in them. So we've seen a huge interest in experimentation and consumer choice, so really interested in what and how we can help Indian consumers with that as well. I think, liberalising tariffs on Scots will enable consumers in India to enjoy a greater choice of brands and greater opportunities and to enjoy more premium products as well.
So let's come down to earth with a bump, Diraj. Tell me what the hurdles are going to be in getting to this next level of freeing up tariffs and looking towards the free trade agreement.
Fact of life is that any free trade agreement creates winners and losers. I think overall you create more winners than losers, but losers tend to have a louder voice. They tend to get themselves organized better. So that's a fact. In any free trade agreement. So on the Indian side, the previous India-EU, when Britain was still part of the EU, FTA got derailed over wine and cheese, as they say. So agriculture is a sensitivity on both sides. I hope wine won't be, but or Scotch won't be. But agriculture is a sensitivity. But I think the good thing, India's previous experience with FTAs. Which we signed basically with the ASEAN countries, Korea, Japan, and our experience was that our imports increased much more than our exports did, and that's what was a bit of a dampener, in the general discourse that why do we get into FTAs if it doesn't increase our exports? Now those countries, I think, had a clear competitive advantage over India in manufacturing, and that is why we didn't do well. With the UK, I think there's much more complementarity. So even in services, for example, I think we need the education, the health, investment there. And so even in services, we are complementary, whereas India would want movement of labor, IT, that side of things. So I think there are likely to be less hurdles, but let's not be unaware of the fact that, there will be interest groups which will oppose it. So my firm belief is that if this has to go ahead, it's all very well for governments to negotiate and negotiators to negotiate, but you need to build constituencies which support the process. So I think, track 1, track 1.5, track 2, track 3, track 4, you need to have multiple tracks going, and you need to carry a lot of people along. And I think I can only speak for the Indian side, and we know in India, trade has always been a contentious issue. There's a concept in India called in trade called trade creation. You lower barriers, trade gets created, there's trade diversion. But in India, we've had a trade aversion for a long time. We don't like imports, and we've been pessimistic about exports. Now that needs to change, and I think for that we need to create constituencies which will support this and engage in a larger dialogue, as well as assuage the concerns of those who think they may lose. Because I think ultimately everybody gains, but things tend to get drowned out in the noise that's created. So we must be very careful. And while fast tracking things is wonderful, and I'd love to see it go on ground and early harvest and all of that, but we must be very careful to create those constituencies and not to allow any major constituency to derail the process, because that's always the risk when negotiating FTAs. And India's experience with FTAs, as I told you right now, hasn't been all that positive. But because those have not been positive, that doesn't mean that others cannot be. And I think UK, US, Australia, these are the ones India needs to look forward to. And after Britain's opted out of the EU and India's opted out of RCEP, there's a need for both countries to integrate elsewhere. And I think there's no better opportunity in this. But as I said, we need to make sure the noise doesn't drown or derail the negotiations.
I'll come to you, Tim. Lord Bilimoria, do you want to have a word about the hurdles and how we might?
The hero's point, I mean, it's very real that India doesn't have many bilateral free trade deals. But hang on, we, for 40 years, had no experience of doing any trade deals. We've now got over 66 of them, and we've got 2 new ones that have just been signed, and we've got the Indian one that started. You know, the world is changing, and we've got to be positive about this. So now, a point that Eileen made is very important. The power of brands. You know, every bottle of Johnny Walker is promoting the UK. Every JCB digger that you see in every part of India is promoting the UK. Over here, my brand, Cobra Beer, is a household name over here. I'm very proud of that, but it's also promoting India. You know, Tatas, the name that Tatas have made for themselves here is phenomenal. People are now waking up to, I think it was Harsh who mentioned, the Foreign Secretary, about the Serum Institute of India. People didn't know before this pandemic, the SII was already the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world. 2 out of 3 children born on this planet are vaccinated by them. And now everyone's heard of them because of the partnership with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. They've already produced 1 billion doses in less than a year, almost 1 billion doses. It's amazing. The world has woken up. My gosh, India's got the biggest vaccine manufacturer in the world that is helping to save the world in the time of a pandemic. If I may just make one more point about the importance of people. The living bridge we've spoken about, one of my responsibilities is I'm head of the international students in the UK. And we had a hostile immigration policy for a long time. Since Boris Johnson has become Prime Minister, it's changed. On the 1st of July this year, we brought back the 2-year post-graduation work visa for international students, including Indian students, which I helped to bring in 2007, 2008. The number of students from India is rocketing. The more students that we can have over here from India, the better, because they are lifelong ambassadors for the 2 countries. And I'll go one step further. The Australia deal, and I hope the New Zealand deal, 18 to 35-year-olds from both countries, UK and Australia, can spend 3 years traveling and working in each other's countries as young people. Can you imagine the power of that in terms of lifelong, generation-long bridges that you build? So we need to encourage mobility of young people, including students, as well as academics.
So that power of people, Tim, let's come back to you to talk about that, because I wonder if the diaspora within Manchester can help and in fact could be a solution to help some of these short-term barriers that we need to jump over.
Yeah, and I mean, we actually Manchester India partnership here, and the chairman of that is a gentleman called Simon Arora, who is of Indian descent but a very successful billionaire in the UK now in retail. And I think having his diaspora's involvement really helps us connect the 2 places. But I mean, what I was going to talk about, I mean, as well as those national to national, the G2G conversations that are going on, I think those sort of place to place and people to people discussions are absolutely as important in that. And if we talk at a sort of city or state level, how we actually tackle joint challenges on, and Lord Bilimoria talked about innovation. I think innovation is one of the huge opportunities for us to work together to try and solve exactly some of the challenges that we face, whether it's about decarbonisation of our urban areas, or whether it's about the health inequalities that we have as well. And the UK suffers from health inequalities, in not quite equal measure to India, but still huge challenges in the UK still in parts of the country. And therefore, I think that talent exchange becomes a critical part of that, because in order to innovate together, we need talent going both ways. British talent going into India, and superb Indian talent coming into our universities, but staying here and being part of innovation system and ecosystem here that is tackling exactly some of those challenges, whether that be about new carbon technology like hydrogen that was mentioned before. We have the hydrogen fuel cell centre here in Greater Manchester looking at transportation and storage, or whether it's around health, areas like medtech, for example, again, a strong area. But again, that then reverts back to the FTA, because if there is that innovation taking place here to produce goods that actually tackle those health inequalities in a more efficient way through personalized medicine and the like, then once we actually develop those medtech products, we want to be able to sell them into each other's countries. And so the flow of innovation can really start to tackle those challenges, whether, as I say, in low carbon or whether it be in health inequalities and health innovation. And I think, we are so similar as people because there is such an affinity between our two countries is over a very long period of time. And those diasporas in both places help us connect further. So I think the way in which we can deal, not just at a government level, but also at a sort of city and state level to tackle those challenges, develop that cooperation around very tangible aspects that face all of our lives. I think, again, that can be a really solid bedrock for the full FTA conversations that will emerge and the interim solutions that we'll look for.
Migration, you're talking about there, it's ancient, unstoppable, and positive if it's well managed, and that is what we're trying to talk about. Diraj, I want to come back to you. Tell me why the timing you think is different this time after Brexit and after India leaving the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that helps us move towards this optimism.
Well, I think there's a particular context in the sense that the world is also recovering from the most serious economic crisis in a long time, brought on by COVID. So I think, every country in the world is looking for opportunities to grow, to prosper, none more than India at this point in time. So I think the global context is different. And I think the fact that, India opted out of RCEP, and that was largely because of the Chinese factor. But the fact is that supply chains at the moment in the world are concentrated in China and East Asia, at least manufacturing. So I think post-COVID again, there's an opportunity. The world is looking for alternative supply chains. Then nobody wants, as was mentioned in the earlier panel, one country to be the source of all supply of manufacturing. So I think India is a natural destination. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking from the Indian point of view here, but I think, so India is going to leverage itself as the next manufacturing power after China. That's why it needs new markets. If you're going to stay out of East Asia, by staying out of RCEP and integration there, you need the markets in the advanced countries, which is the US, UK, and Europe. So UK is a very important part of that. And of course, the fact that, we are inextricably linked, the Chancellor here, the Home Secretary, all people of Indian origin, the President of the Confederation of British Industry. So I think there's no better opportunity than this market for India to become a manufacturing power. And I think for Britain as well, I mean, now that it's out of the EU. As Lord Bilmour said, they're looking at over 60 free trade agreements, and India is a huge market, for Britain, for its innovation, for its education, for its healthcare. So I think, I frankly, I mean, you asked me about the hurdles earlier, and there'll always be hurdles, whenever a negotiation takes place. But I'm quite optimistic about this one because of the deep linkages we have and the possibility to create those, constituencies. So I think we have those ready-made constituencies in both countries, which would favor a deal. And I think the global context in terms of COVID, the need to recover fast, the need to get alternative supply chains to China and East Asia, I think all of these put us in a very, very good position to move ahead. I think 5 years ago, if you asked me about hurdles, it'd be more. I think the hurdles are less now.
Okay. We've run out of time, Lord Bilmour. You're pulling at my sleeve.
Just one last point that we must not forget about. We've spoken about trade, investment. The bilateral investment potential. Already, Indian companies over here, almost 1,000 of them turning over 50 billion pounds. British companies in India employing directly and indirectly 1 million, growing at 26% average per year. The potential for investment is enormous on top of the trade. And the UK is the second largest recipient of inward investment in the world. We've just got to build on that.
All right, huge message of optimism. Thank you so much to my fantastic panel. Tim Nunes joining us from Manchester, Eileen Keyes from Diageo, Diraj Nair from Vedanta, and of course, Lord Bilmour from the CBI. Thank you so much for joining us here at India Global Forum. We'll be right back.